Hi, I want to give you a little information about the finger holds. So the way to remember this is get rid of worry fast. Thumb is worry, and F-A-S-T, fear, anger, sadness or grief, or when we try too hard. I'm going to read to you some of the benefits for each of the fingers. The thumb, the attitudes that we're trying to readjust and balance are worry, depression, and anxiety. The organs that we can balance and help are stomach and spleen. That's for the thumb. And some of the symptoms that we can help by holding our thumb: stomach aches, headaches, skin projects, breathing, and nervousness. The index finger helps us to adjust the attitudes of fear, mental confusion, and frustration. The organs for index finger are kidney and bladder. And some of the projects that we can work on by holding our index finger are digestive projects, elimination, wrist and elbow, upper arm discomforts, muscle projects, and backaches. Now the middle finger is anger. That's why people put their middle finger up when they're angry. Giving someone the bird when we're irritable or indecisive. The organs that we affect with the middle finger are liver and gallbladder. And some of the projects that we can help are eye and vision projects, fatigue, forehead discomforts, circulation projects. Now the ring finger is for sadness, grief, feeling rejected, negative. The organs that we balance with the ring finger are lung and large intestine. Now the projects that we help with the ring finger are digestive, breathing, ear, and serious skin projects. The little finger is when we're trying too hard, when we're overdoing it, insecure, and we're nervous. The organs that we affect with the small finger are heart and small intestines. Some of the projects we can work on are bone, nerves, scratchy throat, a sore throat, and when we're bloated. So I just want you to remember that you can do the finger holds anytime, any place. Your hands are free. It's a great thing to do when you're watching a film or watching television, or just want to make a contemplative time for yourself. Set a context for being still and meditative. You're also affecting the 12 major organs, and you're addressing the attitudes of worry, fear, anger, sadness, grief, and trying too hard. It's a great way to balance ourselves. So I'm always recommending that you do this while you're doing your listening to the readings that I'm doing. Take good care. Namaste. Welcome back. I'm going to be continuing with the summer reading series from When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. This is Julie Broglin reading for you. We're continuing now with Chapter 5. I'm going to remind you that you might want to do your finger holds, holding each finger. You might want to start with 36 breaths, putting your fingers under your underarms, taking a breath in, exhaling out the mouth with sound. And then just keep your lips closed and continue counting for 35 more breaths. And then you might want to follow that with the finger holds, holding each finger for about 3 minutes. So enjoy your practice and enjoy the reading. Chapter 5, It's Never Too Late. I'm going to just turn the camera toward the lake so you can have a different view from me. It's never too late. What makes Maitri such a different approach is that we're not trying to solve a problem. We're not striving to make pain go away or to become a better person. In fact, we're giving up control altogether and letting concepts and ideals fall apart. I get many letters from the worst person in the world. Sometimes this worst person is getting older and feels he has wasted his life. Sometimes she's a suicidal teenager reaching out for help. The people who give themselves such a hard time come in all ages, shapes, and colors. The thing they have in common is that they have no loving kindness for themselves. Recently, I was talking with a man I've known for a long time. I've always considered him to be a shy, good-hearted person who spends more time than most helping other people. On this day, he was completely despondent and feeling like a hopeless case. Intending to be facetious, I asked him, "Well, don't you think that somewhere on this planet there might be someone worse than you?" He answered with heartbreaking honesty, "No. If you want to know what I really feel, it's that there's no one as bad as me." It made me think of Gary Larson cartoon once I saw. Two women are standing behind their locked doors, peeking out the window at a monster standing on their doorstep. One of the ladies is saying, "Calm down, Edna. Yes, it's a giant, hideous insect, but it may be a giant, hideous insect in need of help." The most difficult times for many of us are the ones we give ourselves. Yet it's never too late or too early to practice loving kindness. It's as if we had a terminal disease but might live for quite a while. Not knowing how much time we have left, we might begin to think it was important to make friends with ourselves and others in the remaining hours, months, or years. It is said that we can't attain enlightenment, let alone feel contentment and joy, without seeing who we are and what we do, without seeing our patterns and our habits. This is called Maitri, developing loving kindness and an unconditional friendship with ourselves. People sometimes confuse this process with self-improvement or building themselves up. We can get so caught up in being good to ourselves that we don't pay any attention at all to the impact that we're having on others. We might erroneously believe that Maitri is a way to find happiness that lasts, as advertisement so seductively promise. We could feel great for the rest of our lives. It's not that we pat ourselves on the back and say, "You're the greatest," or "Don't worry, sweetheart, everything's going to be fine." Rather, it's a process by which self-deception becomes so skillfully and compassionately exposed that there's no mask that can hide us anymore. What makes Maitri such a different approach is that we are not trying to solve a problem. We're not striving to make pain go away or to become a better person. In fact, we're giving up control altogether and letting concepts and ideals fall apart. This starts with realizing that whatever occurs is neither the beginning nor the end. It's just the same kind of normal human experience that's been happening to everyday people from the beginning of time. Thoughts, emotions, moods, and memories come and they go, and basic nowness is always here. It's never too late for any of us to look at our minds. We can always sit down and allow the space for anything to arise. Sometimes we have a shocking experience of ourselves. Sometimes we try to hide. Sometimes we have a surprising experience of ourselves. Often we can get carried away without judging, without buying into likes and dislikes. We can always encourage ourselves to just be here again and again and again. The painful thing is that when we buy into disapproval, we're practicing disapproval. When we buy into harshness, we are practicing harshness. The more we do it, the stronger these qualities become. How sad it is that we become so expert at causing harm to ourselves and others. The trick then is to practice gentleness and letting go. We can learn to meet whatever arises with curiosity and not make it such a big deal. Instead of struggling against the force of confusion, we can meet it and relax. When we do that, we gradually discover that clarity is always there. In the middle of the worst scenario of the worst person in the world, in the midst of all the heavy dialogue with ourselves, open space is always there. We carry around an image of ourselves, an image we hold in our minds. One way to describe this is a small mind. It can always be described as Sem. In Tibetan, Sem are several words for mind, but two that are particularly helpful to know are Sem and Rikpa. Sem is what we experience as discursive thoughts, a stream of chatter that's always reinforcing an image of ourselves. Rikpa literally means intelligence or brightness. behind all the planning and worrying, behind all the wishing and wanting, picking and choosing, the unfabricated mind, the unfabricated wisdom mind of Rikpa is always here. Whenever we stop talking to ourselves, Rikpa is continually here. In Nepal, the dogs bark all night long. Every 20 minutes or so, they all stop at once, and there is an experience of immense relief and stillness. Then they all start barking again. The small mind of Sem can feel just like that. When we first start meditating, it's as if the dogs never stop barking at all. After a while, there are those gaps. Discursive thoughts are rather like wild dogs that need taming. Rather than beating them or throwing them stones, we tame them with compassion. Over and over, we regard them with the precision and kindness that allow them to gradually calm down. Sometimes it feels like there's much more space with just a few yips and yaps here and there. Of course, the noise will continue. We aren't trying to get rid of those dogs, but once we've touched in with the spaciousness of Rikpa, it begins to permeate everything. Once we've even had a glimpse of spaciousness, if we practice with Maitri, it will continue to expand. It expands into our resentment. It expands into our fear. It expands into our concepts and opinions about things and into who we think we are. We might sometimes even get the feeling that life is a dream. When I was about 10, my best friend started having nightmares. She'd be running through a huge dark building pursued by hideous monsters. She'd get into a door, struggle to open it, and no sooner had she closed it behind her than she heard it open by the rapidly approaching monsters. Finally, she'd wake up screaming and crying for help. One day, we were sitting in her kitchen talking about her nightmares when I asked her what the demons looked like, and she said she didn't know because she was always running away. After I asked her that question, she began to wonder about the monsters. She wondered if any of them looked like witches, if any of them had knives. So on the next occurrence of the nightmare, just as the demons began to pursue her, she stopped running and turned around. It took tremendous courage, and her heart was pounding, but she put her back up against the wall and looked at them. They all stopped right in front of her and began jumping up and down, but none of them came closer. They were 5 in all, each looked something like an animal. One of them was a gray bear, but instead of claws, it had long red fingernails. One had 4 eyes, another had a wound on its cheek. When she looked closely, they appeared less like monsters and more like 2-dimensional drawings in comic books. Then slowly they began to fade. After that, she woke up, and that was the end of her nightmares. There is a teaching on the 3 kinds of awakening: awakening from the dream of ordinary sleep, awakening at death from the dream of life, and awakening in full enlightenment from the dream of delusion. These teachings say that when we die, we experience it as waking up from a very long dream. When I heard this teaching, I remembered my friend's nightmares. It struck me right then that if all this is really a dream, I might as well spend it trying to look at what scares me instead of running away. I haven't always found this all that easy to do, but in the process, I've learned a lot about Maitri. Our personal demons come in many guises. We experience them as shame, as jealousy, as abandonment, as rage. They are anything that makes us so uncomfortable that we continually run away. We do the big escape. We act out, say something, slam a door, hit someone, or throw a pot as a way of not facing what's happening in our hearts. Or we shove the feelings under and somehow deaden the pain. We can spend our whole lives escaping from the monsters of our minds. All over the world, people are so caught in running that they forget to take advantage of the beauty around them. We become so accustomed to speeding ahead that we rob ourselves of joy. Once I dreamt that I was getting a house ready for Khandro Rinpoche. I was rushing around cleaning and cooking. Suddenly, her car drove up, and there she was with her attendant. As I ran up and greeted them, Rinpoche smiled at me and asked, "Did you see the sun come up this morning?" I answered, "No, Rinpoche, I didn't. I was much too busy to see the sun." She laughed and said, "Too busy to live life?" Sometimes it seems we have a preference for darkness and speed. We can protest and complain and hold a grudge for 1,000 years, but in the midst of the bitterness and resentment, we have a glimpse of the possibility of Maitri. We hear a child crying or smell that someone is baking bread. We feel the coolness of the air or see the first crocuses of spring. Despite ourselves, we are drawn out by the beauty in our own backyard. The way to dissolve our resistance to life is to meet it face to face. When we feel resentment because the room is too hot, we can meet the heat and feel its fierceness and its heaviness. When we feel resentment because the room is too cold, we can meet the cold and feel its iciness and its bite. When we want to complain about the rain, we could feel its wetness instead. When we worry because the wind is shaking our windows, we can meet the wind and hear its sound. Cutting our expectations for a cure is a gift we can give ourselves. There is no cure for hot and cold. They will go on forever. After we have died, the ebb and flow will still continue, like the tides of sea, like day and night. This is the nature of things, being able to appreciate, being able to look closely, being able to open our minds. This is the cure of Maitri. When the rivers and air are polluted, when families and nations are at war, when homelessness wanderers fill the highways, these are traditional signs of a dark age. Another is that people become poisoned by self-doubt and become cowards. Practicing loving kindness towards ourselves seems as a good way as any to start illuminating the darkness of difficult times. Being preoccupied with our self-image is like being deaf and blind. It's like standing in the middle of a vast field of wildflowers with a black hood over our heads. It's like coming upon a tree of singing birds while wearing earplugs. There's so much resentment and so much resistance to life. In all nations, it's like a plague that's gotten out of control, and it's poisoning the atmosphere of the world. At this point, it might be wise to wonder about these things and begin to get the knack of loving kindness. So now we're going to move on to Chapter 6, Not Causing Harm. Hope you're staying with your breathing. It's a transformative experience to simply pause instead of immediately filling up space. By waiting, we begin to connect with fundamental restlessness as well as fundamental spaciousness. Not causing harm obviously includes not killing or robbing or lying to people. It also includes not being aggressive with our actions, our speech, or our minds. Learning not to cause harm to ourselves or others is a basic Buddhist teaching on the healing power of non-aggression. Not harming ourselves or others in the beginning, not harming ourselves or others in the middle, not harming ourselves or others in the end is the basis of enlightened society. This is how there could be a sane world. It starts with sane citizens, and that is us. The most fundamental aggression to ourselves, the most fundamental harm we can do to ourselves is to remain ignorant by not having the courage and the respect to look at ourselves honestly and gently. The ground of not causing harm is mindfulness, a sense of clear seeing with respect and compassion for what it is we see. This is what basic practice shows us, but mindfulness doesn't stop with formal meditation. It helps us relate with all the details of our lives. It helps us see, hear, and smell without closing our eyes or our ears or our noses. It's a lifetime's journey to relate honestly to the immediacy of our experience and to respect ourselves enough not to judge it. As you become more wholehearted in this journey of gentle honesty, it comes as quite a shock to realize how much we blinded ourselves to some of the ways in which we cause harm. Our style is so ingrained that we can't hear when people try to tell us, either kindly or rudely, that maybe we're causing some harm by the way we are or the way we relate with others. When we become so used to the way we do things that somehow we think that others are used to it too. It's painful to face how we harm others, and it takes a while. It's a journey that happens because of our commitment to gentleness, honesty, our commitment to staying awake or being mindful. Because of mindfulness, we see our desires and our aggression, our jealousy and our ignorance. We don't act on them. We just see them. Without mindfulness, we don't see them. The next step is refraining. Mindfulness is the ground. Refraining is the path. Refraining is one of those uptight words that sound repressive. Surely alive, juicy, interesting people would not practice refraining. Maybe they would sometimes refrain, but not as a lifestyle. In this context, however, refraining is very much the method of becoming a dharmic person. It's the quality of not grabbing for entertainment the minute we feel a slight edge of boredom coming on. It's the practice of not immediately filling up space just because there's a gap. Once I was giving an interesting meditation practice that combined mindfulness and refraining. We were told just to notice what our physical movements were when we felt uncomfortable. I began to notice that when I felt uncomfortable, I did things like pull my ear, scratch my nose or head when it didn't itch, or straighten my collar. I made all kinds of little jumpy, jittery movements when I felt like I was losing ground. Our instruction was not to try to change anything, not to criticize ourselves for whatever we were doing, but just to see what we did. Noticing how we try to avoid it is a way to get in touch with basic groundlessness. Refraining, not habitually acting out impulsively, has something to do with giving up entertainment mentality. Through refraining, we see that there's something between the arising of the craving or the aggression or the loneliness or whatever it might be, and whatever action we take as a result. There's something there in us that we don't want to experience, and we never do experience because we're so quick to act. Underneath our ordinary lives, underneath all the talking we do, all the moving we do, all the thoughts in our minds, there's a fundamental groundlessness. If there's a bubbling it's there bubbling all the time. We experience it as restlessness and edginess. We experience it as fear. It motivates passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, and pride, but we never get down to the essence of it. Refraining is a method for getting to know the nature of this restlessness and fear. It's a method for settling into groundlessness. If we immediately entertain ourselves by talking, by acting, by thinking, if there's never any pause, we will never be able to relax. We will always be speeding through our lives. We'll always be stuck with what our grandfather called, or what my grandfather called, a good case of the jitters. Refraining is a way of making friends with ourselves at the most profound level possible. We can begin to relate with what's underneath all the bubbles and burps and farts, all the stuff that comes out and expresses itself as uptight, controlling, manipulative behavior, or whatever it is. Underneath all that, there's something very soft, very tender that we experience as fear or edginess. Once there was a young warrior. Her teacher told her that she had to do battle with fear. She didn't want to do that. It seemed too aggressive. It was scary. It seemed unfriendly. But the teacher said she had to do it and gave her the instructions for the battle. The day arrived. The student warrior stood on one side and fear stood on the other. The warrior was feeling very small and fear was looking big and wrathful. They both had their weapons. The young warrior roused herself and went toward fear, prostrated 3 times and asked, "May I have permission to go into battle with you?" Fear said, "Thank you for showing me so much respect that you asked permission." Then the young warrior said, "How can I defeat you?" Fear replied, "My weapons are that I talk fast and I get very close to your face. Then you get completely unnerved and you do whatever I say. If you don't do what I tell you, I have no power. You can listen to me and you can have respect for me. You can even be convinced by me, but if you don't do what I say, I have no power." And that way, the student warrior learned how to defeat fear. This is how it actually works. There is to be some kind of respect for the jitters, some understanding of how our emotions have the power to run around us in circles. That understanding helps us discover how we increase our pain, how we increase our confusion, how we cause harm to ourselves. Because we have basic goodness, basic wisdom, basic intelligence, we can start harming ourselves and harming others. Because of mindfulness, we see things when they arise. Because of our understanding, we don't buy into the chain reaction that makes things grow from minute from minute to expansive. We leave things minute. They stay tiny. They don't keep expanding into World War III or domestic violence. It all comes through learning to pause for a moment, learning not to just impulsively do the same thing again and again. It's a transformative experience to simply pause instead of immediately filling up the space. By waiting, we begin to connect with fundamental restlessness as well as fundamental spaciousness. By waiting, we begin to connect with fundamental restlessness as well as fundamental spaciousness. The result is that we cease to cause harm. We begin to know ourselves thoroughly and to respect ourselves. Anything can come up. Anything can walk into our house. We can find anything sitting on our living room couch. We don't freak out. We've been thoroughly processed by coming to know ourselves, thoroughly processed by this honest, gentle mindfulness. This process connects us with the fruition of not causing harm, fundamental well-being of our body, speech, and mind. Well-being of body is like a mountain. A lot happens on a mountain. It hails, and the wind comes up, and it rains and snows. The sun gets very hot, clouds come over, animals shit and piss on the mountain, and so do people. People leave their trash, and other people clean it up. Many things come and go on this mountain, but it just sits there. When we've seen ourselves completely, there's a stillness of body that's just like a mountain. We no longer get jumpy and have to scratch our noses, pull our ears, punch somebody, or go running from a room, or drink ourselves into oblivion. A thoroughly good relationship with ourselves results in being still, which doesn't mean we don't run and jump and dance about. It means there's no compulsiveness. We don't overwork, overeat, oversmoke, overseduce. In short, we begin to stop causing harm. Well-being of speech. Trying to move this. Okay, sorry. Well-being of speech is like a lute without strings. Even with strings, the musical instrument proclaims itself. This is an image of our speech being settled. It doesn't mean that we're controlling, uptight, trying hard not to say the wrong thing. It means that our speech is straightforward and disciplined. We don't start blurting out words just because no one else is talking and we're nervous. We don't chatter away like magpies and crows. We've heard it all. We've been insulted and we've been praised. We know what it is to be in situations where everyone is angry, where everyone is peaceful. We're at home in the world because we're at home with ourselves, so we don't feel that out of nervousness, out of our habitual pattern, we have to run at the mouth. Our speech is tamed, and when we speak, it communicates. We don't waste the gift of speech in expressing our neurosis. Well-being of mind is like a mountain lake without ripples. When the lake has no ripples, everything in the lake can be seen. When the water is all churned up, nothing can be seen. The still lake without ripples is an image of our minds at ease, so full of unlimited friendliness for all the junk at the bottom of the lake that we don't feel the need to churn up the waters just to avoid looking at what's there. Not causing harm requires staying awake. Part of being awake is slowing down enough to notice what we say and do. The more we witness our emotional chain reactions and understand how they work, the easier it is to refrain. It becomes a way of life to stay awake, slow down, and notice. At the root of all the harm we cause is ignorance. Through meditation, that's what we begin to undo. If we see that we have no mindfulness, that we rarely refrain, that we have little well-being, that is not confusion, that's the beginning of clarity. As the moments of our lives go by, our ability to be deaf, dumb, and blind just doesn't work so well anymore. Rather than making us more uptight, interestingly enough, this process liberates us. This is the liberation that naturally arises when we become completely here, without anxiety and imperfection. So I just want to end this chapter, because this has a lot to do with peace work. When we do this work of being still with ourselves and our thoughts, facing our fears, and we get to have a liberation. And this also helps us to understand those people who act in angry ways, with hatred. It really comes down to their being limited, being full of ignorance, and not having the courage to face themselves and reality. Thanks for listening. Namaste.